Hey, detoxers. Today we have a very special treat. We talk a lot on this program about fake news, disinformation. We haven't really spent a lot of time so far talking about the role the advertising industry plays. That's why I am very, very happy that I am joined by the author of Adjust How Ads Shape What You Think and Do and What to Do About It. We all know I'm very big on solutions here. I'm joined by the author, Allie Di Lorenzo. Welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's great to have you, and thank you so much. I'm glad we were able to connect online. And I think your book is great. I highly recommend folks get a copy. I think it's a great insiders behind the scene, but it's also a great what you can do with the information book, which I always really appreciate. I think, I come from academia where we constantly are writing books about doom and gloom. And then the final chapter is like, but we should be optimistic. But your book actually has things to do about it. So can you tell folks a little bit about sort of maybe summarize what this book is about, the Adjust, and how you got into this topic and writing about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent the best part of my adult life first studying media and then subsequently working in the media sector in London across a bunch of companies, including well-known brands. And one of the last big roles that I had was I founded and then became the CEO of lastminute.com's media company, which lastminute.com in Europe is one of the biggest online travel agents. And that role was so full on and so just generally based on creating influence to drive revenue and results that it gave me an aha moment, a moment of reckoning or realization. And after I had my little girl, who's now 4, I really started looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, well, do you know what I've contributed to build all of this technology, which is essentially selling stuff to people in very obscure ways. And I think people, consumers on the receiving end, parents, teachers, all of us should essentially be aware of how it works. Because influence, if not explained, becomes manipulation. And it's super, super scary in my mind, especially when it comes to children and their cognitive ability to basically understand it. So I wrote Adjust, which is supposed to be hopefully a guide in simple terms. Apologies, my WhatsApp is going off. Um, it's supposed to be a guide in simple terms to help everyone. The mum, the yoga teacher, anybody who is not an expert in media should be able to read the book and understand at least part of it. And my intention is to give them the tools, give everybody the tools to be critical about what we see online. I believe we are exposed to promotional content about 3-4 hours a day. I've conducted some experiments myself actually on this, and this is completely unregulated. It's regulated in some ways by the government, but for consumers, there's very little protection and awareness.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because folks may be wondering what are some of the things that you would want people to know about how kind of the advertising industry works and how it targets people. What are some of those things that folks need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the core of the whole ecosystem sits in the checks, basically the balances and the way money moves around. So you've got the brands on one side that obviously own the product and own the brand, who are trying to reach audiences. And the way they reach these audiences is by essentially putting ads and communication stuff on platforms. And these platforms could be our social networks, or they could be traditional publishers that are somewhat still supported by advertising, although that is under threat at the moment. In the middle, you've got advertising agencies. And these entities, also under threat due to AI, act as intermediaries and also help in the exchange of value, taking a cut of the budgets that the brands are basically putting out to communicate to their audiences. Now, what's super important is that in this exchange, it's not only revenue, money that gets exchanged, brands pay agencies, agencies pay publishers, But what the real value is the data that gets exchanged. And that data is not only, uh, pixels and just an abstract form of data. This is real data. It's information about what we like and what we don't like, and what we do and what we don't do. And it's so sophisticated now. These tools, many of us are, talking about algorithms. These tools, these machines that sit inside these platforms, essentially take all of this data, and then they predict what we might be interested in next, and then show us advertising based on that. And this is super scary, because if you are not cognitively aware of how this works, you will end up doing things based on an influence that you don't understand. You might end up buying things that you didn't even know you wanted. And you might even, in younger generations, be forming a sense of self which you don't control yourself. And there's loads of studies around the impact of advertising on self-esteem and mental health, which is now in many ways regulated by algorithms. And with AI, this is now becoming really creepy. And so, yeah, in the book, I talk about, the ins and outs of how this works, and in a lot more detail, how the pricing models work, and the bidding wars, the real-time bidding, the demographic targeting, but also the predictive modeling, the lookalike modeling. All of this is in the book. And it might not be interesting for everyone, but I think if even 10% of this information gets passed through, it creates awareness, and that's my goal.
Very, very good. And I share your position on that. That I think if you demystify a lot of these processes, people wouldn't engage in them. But I think right now they're so enamored with how amazing it is. You can, shop from your couch and things like that. It occurred to me while you were talking there that I'm very familiar with the United States regulatory framework around a lot of this stuff, but not so much in the UK. We have a lot of US listeners. Is there any regulation in the UK, or any kind of major pieces of regulation that you think would provide some context for people maybe understanding kind of the framework you're working in versus what we're dealing with here in the US?
Yes, I mean, I think UK and Europe, even after Brexit, still very relevant in terms of sort of coherence. We're regulated by what's called GDPR, which is similar to the California regulatory around data privacy and protection. However, this and there are other bodies that regulate advertising, obviously, to minors, and this whole work, unfortunately, in my mind, is very surface level. I'll give you a practical example. When we open a website, and the website shows us this cookie policy, which is mandatory right now, and you have to explicitly opt in to click something and say, yes, I'm happy for this. Does anybody actually bother opening up that pop-up and looking at all of the technologies, hundreds, in some cases thousands, of ad tech providers that by simply clicking accept on that cookie policy, they get the data gets sent out, and we lose control of it? Now, that's so I believe that GDPR, these regulations are palliative. They don't really add value. And then if you take another lens on this, and you think about it from a media literacy perspective, governments are doing very, very little in terms of teaching people what to do to protect themselves. Very, very little. I mean, France and Germany over here are the most virtuous. But if you take Germany, for example, I mean, they're structured in the sense that they've included media literacy in their curriculum. So younger generations get taught this kind of stuff, but it gets updated every 5 years. And I mean, 5 years ago, we didn't have AI.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that the solution to this is driven by ministry. I believe it needs to be grassroots. And I'm so happy about this conversation, because my mission is to talk about this stuff to as many people that will listen, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's great, and I totally agree. I mean, generally, I think democratic change has to happen from the grassroots by definition, and so I think that the work you're doing and others in the space is really important. So think about one of those grassroots components that you made me think of when you were reading your book, and when you were talking just a moment ago. We, especially in the media literacy space, we talk so much about education in the classroom, and I feel like oftentimes we don't talk enough about parents. And don't worry, this isn't a diatribe to blame parents. Instead, something different, which is, I think parents have a critical role to play. I always say my first media literacy lesson was I watched some commercial for a toy, and I forget what they did in the commercial, all these crazy things. And I told my mom, like, I want that toy, and she was like, those commercials aren't true. That the toy doesn't do that. And I was like, just like, wow, commercials lie. Like, it was such an important media literacy lesson for my childhood. But I think there are a lot of parents out there who really care about this stuff. They're very interested in this. Obviously, they care about their children. What advice do you have for those folks? What are some things that they could do, or perhaps review or consider, knowing what you know? What would you recommend them?
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of work with parents. I actually spend a lot of time with parenting platforms in uh, basically small groups to have conversations with people. And what we do is we start with trying to understand the cognitive development of children, and in every stage try to explain to parents how to explain, how to teach media literacy to kids based on obviously their abilities and their growth path, their growth paths, their growth paths. And so, I mean, there's no point in trying to teach media literacy to a toddler. However, toddlers are very targeted by media. And sometimes the media they see is not called media, it's not labeled sponsored. But influence starts at very, very early ages. So in the book, I've tried to put in some very practical tools, in terms of controls and things that people can do. And the internet is full of this advice. So actually, parenting controls. But I think it's not so much about the technology. This is a very human topic. This is about how parents can talk to their kids and explain to their kids why advertising is trying to influence, and that it is trying to influence, to your point, and explain how the balances of power work and what the advertising is trying to make you do. Cereal boxes are a very good example of advertising, right? And I suppose it's self-explanatory, right? So having that conversation with your kid at breakfast, hey, you know what? That tiger on the box, let's talk about it.
Um, Good. And then what about folks in industry? Because I teach in higher ed, and I have a lot of students in common media studies who their goal is to go into industry. They want to go work for ABC, and they want to go work for social media companies. And when they get their first job, they email me, and they're kind of sheepish about it. But I'm like, hey, you do you. That's your life. I'm not going to tell you, and I'm proud of you for doing whatever it is you do. But some of those folks in industry, my point is, come from, I think, a well-meaning place. They really want to be a part of the industry. They're excited by it, but they want to, minimize harm. What's some advice do you have for those folks who are maybe considering getting into the industry, ways to maybe do it right, if there is a way?
Brilliant question. I actually ran a survey. We surveyed 250 industry professionals across the US and UK. And the skew of the survey was to basically look at mental health in the sector. And so to answer your question, I'm going to try and be really positive, because I also teach. I'm a lecturer and I try to help. I actually just got a message from one of my ex-students saying, I don't like agency. Can you help me go brand side? Literally 5 years ago. So again, I teach it at master's degree level. So when they come in, what I notice is that many people still don't understand exactly how this works. So, the difference between a brand, an agency, and a publisher. And I don't know whether that's the European just lack of understanding of this or not. I'd be interested in your opinion, actually. But the topic here for me is that young minds that are stepping into work must do it consciously. Some of the results from the study show really high levels of burnout, particularly across agencies, because the demands are so high, and the business model is so brutal. It's billable hours at the end of the day, and so anybody that has that desire to go into agency must know that they will be squeezed at the very beginning of their careers. They'll learn a lot, that's the trade-off, but there is an element of that. And then you've got the conversation around brand side. Well, brands are amazing, but how many marketing managers are there in the world? It's a very competitive space. And then you've got publishers under pressure, because obviously, well, generative engine optimization is killing the SEO and advertising as a consequence. And then you've got the platforms such as, the walled gardens, TikToks, Facebooks, and so on. And those are massive corporations, and they kind of, in many ways, work like governments. So it's very institutionalized. Your margin of influence is super, super small. So, if you want to be in an ecosystem where you understand the bigger picture, you're not going to get it there, because you're going to be, pigeonholed into a little role. And it's great to have the job title, the experience, maybe the free sandwich. So in a nutshell, for young future business people coming into this industry, know that it's under severe disruption. Change is super fast. So flexibility and resilience is the first skill to learn before any of the hard skills. And then if we can, try to do things for the good. So, influence is part of how this thing works, and that's just part of the game. But, be aware of what you're doing.
Okay, just one other question. This is the curiosity part of me, but since you worked in the industry, do you have any sense of the folks you used to work with? How they kind of feel about your book, or how you think they would feel about your book?
Yeah, actually, the book I wrote the book with some of my students, because it was born. Yeah, of course, the corporate side of me gave me the big revelation, and my daughter and all that. But actually, part of the curriculum that I teach is in the book. The first chapter is, trying to explain what we said before, the checks and balances, the industry, how the money moves, metrics, the algorithms, all of that lives in there. And the feedback that I get from my students is incredible. I mean, they're like literally telling me, "Thank God you're here, because now I get it. Now I get it. The penny drops, right?" And so, yeah, I mean, it's my passion. I just, that it gives me goosebumps when I get this feedback, because it's super cool, right? So, yeah.
Well, your passion and commitment comes through both in obviously this interview, but also in the book itself. Where can folks go to get the book, and how can they continue to follow your work?
So the book is on Amazon, widely available, and LinkedIn is where I live. And I'm not the most avid poster, but I've been convinced to do more of it. I will learn from you, Nolan, surely. I know that your work is incredible. So I'll be definitely talking much more about this topic. One of the things that I'd like to do is take some of the advertising that we see commonly and start breaking it down. So explaining, why we're seeing it, what it's doing, all of the various influence theories and influence tactics that are being used in the media. So yeah, watch that space. LinkedIn.
Sounds very exciting. Pick up a copy of the book. Ali Di Lorenzo, I want to thank you very much for coming on the Disinfo Detox.
Thank you very much, Nolan, and thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
All right, detoxers, it's been a pleasure. Hang in there. Keep detoxing.
Yo, detoxers, this is the Disinfo Detox. Want to keep media literacy alive and kicking? Chip in at patreon.com/disinfodetox. Broke? We get it. Just like, comment, follow, or share. Even your hate helps the algorithm. Thank you for supporting the Disinfo Detox, where media literacy meets breaking news.